Hey there, and welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're diving into a concept that is, honestly, completely mind-bending. Just take a second and imagine that you might actually be carrying the emotional weight of your ancestors, right? We almost always think of our feelings, our fears, and our random anxieties as entirely our own, shaped by our own personal life experiences. But what if they aren't? What if the trauma, the intense fear, or the suffering experienced by generations before you was somehow passed down directly to you? It's fascinating, it's definitely a little intimidating, but it is absolutely crucial to understand. So let's just jump right in.
So, let me ask you, are you affected by the past of your grandparents? Could your current anxieties, or maybe that weird, intense reaction you get to stress, actually belong to someone you might never have even met? Our source material for this explainer shows us that, you might inherit way more than just your grandfather's green eyes or your grandmother's straight hair. You might literally inherit the trauma and anxiety they lived through, even if it happened over a century ago. It's a phenomenon known as transgenerational trauma. Basically, it means your struggles right now in the present, well, they might just have their roots buried deep in the past.
All right, here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. First, the mystery of 3 intersecting generations. 2. Real stories of inherited trauma. 3. The impact of trauma on brain chemistry. 4. The biological transmission of fear and stress. 5. Using self-awareness to break the cycle. And finally, 6. The role of counseling in generational recovery.
Moving right into part 1, the mystery of 3 intersecting generations.
Okay, let's break down the literal timeline of your existence. You were born from an egg that began forming inside your mother's body when she was still a fetus inside her mother's womb. Just wrap your head around that for a second. Between the 4th and 5th month of fetal development, a female fetus starts developing her ovarian cells in the eggs within them. That means your grandmother, your mother, and a tiny cellular piece of you all existed in one single body at the exact same time. So the really crucial takeaway here is this. If your grandmother suffered from severe psychological distress, maybe starvation, violence, or extreme grief while she was pregnant with your mother, her entire body was affected. And because you were there, as a developing cellular egg inside that exact environment, your cellular makeup could actually be directly impacted by her trauma. We are literally, sometimes born from the womb of past suffering.
Let's zoom out a bit and look at part 2, real stories of inherited trauma.
To put this into perspective, let's go back about 25 years. A massive 7.6 Richter scale earthquake hit Western Turkey. It lasted a mere 37 seconds, but in that incredibly short time, over 18,000 people died and massive destruction followed. And then, just 3 months later, another severe quake hit that exact same region. Well, researchers decided to track the psychological state of the teenage girls who survived this horrific event, and they followed them for 20 years. Over those 2 decades, these women grew up, got married, and had kids, and the researchers asked a really pivotal question. Did that massive trauma those mothers faced 2 decades ago impact the children they had long after the dust settled?
And this phenomenon isn't just limited to natural disasters, by the way. It totally applies to massive, historical, collective traumas, too. Take Native American populations displaced over 400 years ago. Studies show their descendants today deal with suicide rates that are literally 10 to 19 times higher than their peers. Or look at South Africa. Descendants of women who lived under the severe daily stress of apartheid 70 years ago showed a noticeably higher vulnerability to psychiatric disorders once they hit adolescence, long after those specific policies ended. And we see similar patterns in Palestinians facing ongoing collective conflict, where intense collective stress becomes almost woven right into the collective identity and psychological baseline from birth. These case studies neutrally but really powerfully show us how sweeping collective traumas leave measurable psychological footprints on generations born long after the original events.
Which brings us to part 3, the impact of trauma on brain chemistry.
Remember those kids born to the Turkish earthquake survivors we just talked about? Well, when researchers actually scanned their brains, the results were honestly stunning. They found that children of traumatized ancestors often have a physically smaller amygdala compared to a normal baseline. Now, the amygdala is basically your brain's threat detection center. Because it developed abnormally small in these kids, they had a really hard time regulating fear. They'd show this massive, over-the-top stress reaction to minor, everyday threats, and were at a much higher risk of developing conditions like PTSD. And here is the real kicker. These kids never experienced the earthquake. Actually, scratch that, they weren't even a thought yet. But their brains were physically altered by something their mother went through decades prior. Crazy, right?
Moving to part 4, the biological transmission of fear and stress.
Let's talk about the sympathetic nervous system for a second. This is your body's fight or flight network. It's the whole system that makes your heart pound, your breathing speed up, and your senses get hyper sharp when you face danger, whether that's a literal predator or just a really scary job interview. But here's what the studies show. Infants born to mothers who suffered severe psychological, physical, or emotional abuse during their own childhoods, they often enter the world with a hyperactive sympathetic nervous system. Just imagine a tiny infant whose normal, everyday baseline state is to be constantly on edge, physically bracing for a threat that just isn't there. The trauma literally crossed over and basically rewired their core biological defenses.
And it goes even deeper into our genetics and hormones, specifically our baseline cortisol levels. Now, cortisol is commonly known as the stress hormone, and our bodies desperately need it to be precisely regulated just to adapt to daily life. After the 9/11 attacks back in 2001, researchers looked at pregnant women who were near the World Trade Center and who ended up developing PTSD. When their babies were born, their baseline cortisol levels were drastically lower than normal infants. As a direct result, these babies were incredibly sensitive to things like loud noises or unfamiliar faces. They really struggled to adapt to completely standard stressors. Essentially, the mother's trauma wrote a brand new biological script for exactly how the child's body handles the entire world.
So how do we fix it? That's part 5, self-awareness to break the cycle.
So what's actually stopping us from healing all of this? Well, there are a few major roadblocks. First up, family secrets. A grandma might totally hide past abuse just to protect your kids. Or maybe a family buries a past crime to avoid a scandal. Because of that, the descendants inherit the anxiety, but they literally have zero historical context to explain it. Second, there's the immense social stigma that unfortunately still surrounds mental illness and stops open conversations dead in their tracks. And third, the fear of shattering a strong collective identity. When a whole community has survived massive hardship, suggesting that the newest generation is suffering from deep inherited trauma, well, it can feel like you're somehow undermining their resilient, tough image. But ignoring the reality, that just guarantees the cycle keeps on going.
Listen to this quote closely because it's absolutely crucial. By making a decision, you can stop the trauma with yourself so it does not continue to the next generations. That is the absolute core takeaway of this entire explainer today. Awareness is everything. Once you realize that your overwhelming anxiety, or maybe that sudden burst of anger, might just be the echo of your grandfather's unspoken pain, you can finally stop blaming yourself. The generations before us often didn't have the luxury, the scientific knowledge, or frankly, the safety to heal themselves. But the good news? We do.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 6, the role of counseling in generational recovery.
Breaking this cycle is actually a very logical process. Step 1. Simply acknowledge the inherited trauma. You gotta stop just fighting the symptoms and recognize their deeper, older roots. Step 2. Take psychological self-assessments. You really need to figure out what your baseline even is. And step 3. Consult with specialized therapists online. I can't emphasize this enough. You absolutely do not have to navigate this heavy, super complex generational burden all by yourself. The incredible beauty of modern technology is that professional help is way more accessible now than it has ever been in human history.
For example, the source material for today highlights the Arab Therapy app as a really fantastic tool for this exact issue. It gives you direct access to a massive network of specialized Arab and German therapists. Whether you're dealing with inherited trauma that's showing up as marital issues, or maybe you're noticing some behavioral problems in your own kids, they have professionals specifically trained for that. They even offer free, super simple psychological self-tests right inside the app, so you can get a quick preliminary read on your state before you even commit to anything. Plus, to help remove financial barriers, they offer a massive 50% off the first session. Honestly, these are the modern tools specifically designed to break ancient chains, and you can do the whole shebang right from the comfort and privacy of your own home.
So, I'll leave you with this question. What steps will you take today to ensure that your past doesn't become your children's future? We've looked at the microscopic evidence hiding in our cells, we've looked at the brain scans, and we understand now how fear can literally travel across time. But we also know that the buck can absolutely stop with you. You have the knowledge, you have the tools, and you have the power to completely rewrite your family's psychological future. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Now, go take that first step.